Hello, we are reading the Silmarillion, chapter 6 and 7. Chapter 6 is of Fëanor and the Unchaining of Melkor, and chapter 7 is of the Silmarils and the Unrest of Noldor, of the Noldor. This chapter's mainly about Fëanor and Fëanor's goings on in and around Valinor, and then Melkor's poison coming into all of the Eldar around this time. Fëanor is such an interesting elf. I mean, I find it personally hard to imagine elves as like super angry and full of, but like Fëanor coming in and challenging Fingolfin. All I can imagine is like a swish of robes and this long flowing hair, and he's like, how dare you? But his hair is just like flowing and beautiful, and I'm like, can you really? How can he actually look angry? Like, it is hard to imagine elves being like all pent up emotional fire on the inside. So Fëanor to me is like the most passionate elves so far, the most conflicted, the most, dare I say it, like the most mortal. It's kind of like if this behavior came from a mortal man, it would seem like in character. But for a 1,000+ year old elf who's been hanging out in Valinor, for him to be so immature just doesn't seem right. It's crazy how immature these elves are despite living for so long. Like, I'm more mature than Fëanor at my mere 33 years of life, and he's, I don't know how old. It just seems crazy. And so maybe another curse of immortality is that you don't necessarily grow and change and mature really quickly. Maybe one of the gifts to mortal men that Tolkien gave was that there is a very quick sort of wisdom gathering that you get over this short lifespan. And maybe the perspective of like impending death does make one much wiser. And I think that is true. Like, we know it does. When you're young and you feel immortal, you generally are a little bit less tolerable to society. And as soon as whenever you tap into the knowledge of your mortality, you suddenly have that perspective and that gratitude, and it changes where your priorities are. And elves don't have that. They don't. And Fëanor is like, maybe that's why I'm just seeing such an immaturity on page. But the other thing is that the elves and men and dwarves and all other creatures in Middle-earth are a mixture of all of the Valar and all of the Ainur, I should say. So that means that some are going to have more bits of Melkor than others. And Fëanor clearly is like, he got a big dose of like Melkor genetics. He had, according to his mother, I love that his name is Finwë as well as Fëanor. The spirit of fire. Basically, his birth was so intense that his mother it really weakened her. Never again shall I bear a child, for strength that would have nourished the life of many has gone forth into Fëanor. It seems so unfair for her, honestly. Okay, your son is going to be so great and powerful that that's it for you. Oh my gosh. She also says, I would weep if I were not so weary, but hold me blameless in this and in all that may come after. So Miriel, Fëanor's mother, who is Finwë's first wife, knows. She knows stuff. And she has been hanging out in, because Manwë delivered her to the care of Urmo in Lorien. So I do think that she has gained perspective, despite her weariness, about the impact of what Fëanor's going to have in the world through hanging out there. And I think there was a comment at some point that, yeah, Finwë desired to bring forth many children into the bliss of a man. Very natural. I mean, he was one of the elves that like wanted everyone to come and chill in, and was so sad when he was sad when Elwë wasn't around. Like, I genuinely think like Finwë just he seems like a really good guy, but wait until we get to what he fails to do. It's interesting that Finwë is the king, the High King of the Noldor, and doesn't seem to have a lot of the sort of Noldor spirit and creativity. Like, I don't think anything is mentioned about him creating anything. He just seems to be like a figurehead, is what it reads like. And all his love he gave thereafter to his son. And Fëanor grew swiftly, as if a secret fire were kindled within him. He was tall and fair of face, and masterful, his eyes piercing bright, and his hair raven dark. In the pursuit of all his purposes, eager and steadfast. Few changed his courses by counsel, none by force. So essentially, once he has an idea about wanting to do something, no one, not even his father. Yeah, I think the only one who he actually listened to was his wife, Nerdanel. And so no one would change his mind, and none by force, either because no one tried or because no one could, because he was very powerful. Though no one did try, it doesn't seem like there's like much conflict going on like in Fëanor's like early years. Like, no one has swords and weapons yet, and no one is like actively undermining people. Like, Fëanor starts the undermining. So Fëanor desires to master minds, whereas Nerdanel desires to understand minds. And so when they were married, she kind of kept a lid on the fire that was burning in the barrel of Fëanor. And then she had 7 sons. Her mood she bequeathed in part to some of them, but not to all. So she had 7 sons who have mainly taken after Fëanor, as is how I've read that. And then eventually they grow apart, which I think is when Fëanor becomes more and more off the rails. But hey, it does mean that he responded to someone who was good in his life. Like, at some point in his life, Fëanor was responding well to his wife. And he learned a whole bunch of stuff, and as would any child who watches their parents remarry and have new children, he did find it difficult when Finwë got married to Indus and his 2 half-brothers Fingolfin and Fëanor were born. I like the description of how Fëanor is sort of the mightiest. Fingolfin was the strongest and most steadfast and most valiant, and Fëanor was the fairest and most wise of heart. That was actually in the previous chapter, but I've just had to go to remind myself of. So Fëanor the mightiest, and mightiest can be like good or bad connotations, or both. Fingolfin is the strongest and most steadfast. I'm interpreting that as Fëanor being the strongest of mind with regards to sort of integrity, I would say. And then Fëanor is the most wise of heart and the fairest. Maybe Fëanor is the most emotionally intelligent. I'm actually struggling to figure out how Fëanor and Fingolfin are different. But Fingolfin's valiance, it seems like he's quite righteous and has his heart in good places, and that he sticks to that, and he's very practical. I think from reading these 2 chapters, I really like Fingolfin. He seems like a really good guy, good elf, good guy, a king of the elves. And when you're the king of the Noldor elves, which are the elves with the most unrest and the most creativity and passion in their hearts, it's never a great idea to have 3 sons, Finwë. I know you wanted many, but I do wonder what it would have been like if Finwë never remarried. I mean, it's pretty cruel, because I understand why Finwë remarried. To lose your partner is terrible. To lose your partner and know that you actually have like immortality ahead of you, being alone, it actually seems even crueler. But, you know, if he just didn't do that, and Fëanor was the only son, is there a pathway in the future where Fëanor could have actually been better and been good, is a very fascinating question. Because we know by now that Tolkien's all about, you know, chance occurrences and the domino effect of what leads on after that. So the greatest idea on Earth on Arda, was to release Melkor because he's totally learnt his lesson, and as he comes out he just looks in envy and he's even more annoyed. And he also sees all these bright gems which he loves, and he hid his thoughts and postponed his vengeance. So we have like ultimate evil mastermind Melkor, who not only is like, it was dangerous leaving him in Middle Earth to his own devices, but it seems equally as bad to have him here. Like, I'm assuming that he's kind of disguising or like taking the body of an elf a lot of the time, because we don't know what he looks like, and interacts with people. And that must be really confusing for the elves, because when you see someone who looks like you kind of assume that they're similar. And so that's how he started to manipulate people. Abases himself at the feet of Manwë and begged for pardon. And Nienna is like helping him and praying for him. I don't think Nienna is necessarily fooled. I think she just genuinely believes, like, because sorrow and heartache being her kind of portfolio, she must be drawn to Melkor, who at the moment is like, Melkor is not in a good space psychologically. He never has been, but I feel like he actually just gets worse as time goes on. And Mandos was silent. Mandos knows what's coming and does nothing. When you are the god of fate, you don't want to intervene, because that's the whole, like, that's the whole point of fate. You can't intervene. Oh my gosh, that would be the worst, to be the god of fate. Oh, I would hate that. I say he's the god of fate, but, or he's not like the god of fate, but the god of judgment. And he uses the word doom a lot. And we're in the same situation as we were when they were initially dealing with Melkor, is that the Valar haven't learnt from their mistakes, and they didn't previously understand how someone could be evil and lie. Then they saw that Melkor did it, but they still haven't learnt their lesson. They still have... I think that Manwë simply cannot relate to the fact that you can't repent. Like, Manwë truly believes that Melkor is getting better because he believes in the power of goodness. And like, Manwë, like, Melkor losing his evil is kind of like Manwë losing his goodness. If the Ainur could change their base properties so easily, that would destroy all of Ilúvatar's plans. They are, in a way, kind of deterministic, these Ainur. They have their characteristics, and that's the box that they have to stay in. And Manwë's little box, there is no little section in that says, just remember that someone who is evil might actually stay evil forever. Like, Manwë can't comprehend that thought and genuinely thinks that Melkor could get better. Tulkas and Ulmo are not deceived. So it's good to know that some of the Ainur are not getting deceived. And what we get here is that they just don't do anything, though, because they, being Ainur and being good, they don't go outside of authority, because that's also not something outside of their box. Like, they can't fathom not being obedient, or not obedient, but like doing what Manwë said. Because they can't fathom being rebels. They can fathom Melkor lying, but can't fathom themselves then standing against Manwë. It's contradictory in a way. What I really love about this chapter is that at the end of it, there's a few sentences about how Melkor hated Fëanor, which we knew because he hates all elves, but Fëanor hated Melkor just as much. And we also find out that Fëanor was the first one to dub him Morgoth. And caught as though he was in the webs of Melkor's malice against the Valar, he held no converse with him and took no counsel from him. None in the elderly ever hated Melkor more than Fëanor, son of Finwë. Yeah, thanks for that, just in case we forgot who Fëanor's dad was. When I was reading this, I initially thought that Fëanor was going to be like a little puppet of Melkor, and always obey him and do what he says, kind of like a lot of other I'm assuming a lot of other Melkor's puppets. But no, he is not at all. Because he's actually like a mini Melkor, he doesn't want any master, because Melkor didn't want a master, so Melkor can't master someone like himself, because that creature is also going to be like, no, I'm my own master too, thank you very much. So I love that they're sort of butting heads here, and that their common enemy seems to be the Valar, but that seems to have arisen naturally in both of them. Like, Fëanor was already like fiercely independent and taking the counsel from no one and sort of separate from everyone before Melkor was even released, is how I've assumed that this is the case. Fëanor makes the Silmarils, which I know are like a huge deal, but kind of reading it, you're just like, okay, so he's made these beautiful gems that have blended the light of the trees of Valinor in them. It's kind of amazing that he's been able to do that. Like, that is actually pretty amazing, considering that no one got even close to making anything like that. Okay. When Melkor learnt about the Silmarils, he definitely wanted to end the friendship of the Valar and the elves. And he did so in such a cunning and undermining way that no one could ascribe the initial source of rumors and whispers and evil back to Melkor, which is definitely like kind of the scariest way that evil can arise, is when you think the idea comes from your own head and not from another source. That is a very powerful evil, which is what Melkor was doing. He was basically just whispering to people so that many who heard them believed in recollection that they arose from their own thought. So this is very much like how devils would work. And for those of you that haven't read the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, considering that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis had some close correspondence, I'm assuming that they've had lots of discussions about the nature of evil. And especially in the Screwtape Letters, you do get the devils having a discussion among each other and reminding each other to make sure that none of the humans actually realize that the source of evil is coming from them, because if they do, then they'll reject it. So if the elves knew that the source of evil was coming from Melkor, they would immediately reject it. So the key is to make them believe that it is not arising from that external place, and then they will fall for it, or at least they won't be able to distinguish so easily that it's actually an evil in their own minds, including telling them about the existence of men and sparking fear into the hearts of the elves regarding the men who don't yet exist, and how they might become very great over in Middle-earth, and, you know, the ideas that why are they even here in Aman when they could be in Middle-earth? Is this limiting their power? And for a race like the Noldor, that would very much be of concern to them, because they actually are very proactive, and so that would be a concerning idea. I love this. Fiercest burned the new flame of desire for freedom and wider realms in the eager heart of Fëanor, and Melkor laughed in his secrecy, for to that mark his lies had been addressed, hating Fëanor above all and lusting ever for the Silmarils. So even though Melkor couldn't initially sway Fëanor, overall it's actually working now, because he's creating this environment that is the perfect storm for Fëanor to also just feel more and more frustrated at his situation, and also become more and more greedy of the Silmarils. So there's this point where all this unrest had Finwë call council. It's at this point where Fëanor is also just thinking that the elves are trapped in thraldom under the Valar. Yes, Melkor is very happy about this. Fingolfin is basically just trying to tell his father, can you just like try to reason with Finwë, with Fëanor? And then Fëanor hears this, which is not a great situation that he's like walked in on this particular conversation. Like, the timing really changed things. But anyway, Fëanor heard this. It probably wouldn't have gone well either way, but Fëanor walks in fully armoured, and armour and swords are a new thing. Melkor's little invention that he's got in there holds a sword at his brother's throat. And not throat, or at his chest. Hang on, where does it say that? Oh, against his breast, sorry. And this is sharper than thy tongue. See, half-brother, try but once more to usurp my place and the love of my father, and maybe it will rid the Noldor of the one who seeks to be the master of thralls. So Fëanor is just so insecure in his position of, like, he just wants everything. He wants the love of Finwë only for himself, and he wants to also have the most influence as well. Twice that Fëanor provoked Fingolfin. Fingolfin actually just didn't respond and just walked away, which is just such a boss move. Kind of passive aggressive, but it wasn't actually. He was just probably being like, there is no point reasoning with something unreasonable. As we said in the last chapter, nothing persuades Fëanor, like that no council can persuade Fëanor from making up his mind, except for occasionally his wife. So Fingolfin has learnt hundreds of years ago probably that there is literally no point in reasoning with Fëanor. And so I can imagine after hundreds of years passing, you would just like give up actually speaking to them and just walk away, which is what Fingolfin did, which I find quite funny. And very practical, which is why I like Fingolfin. But the Valar kind of take it upon themselves to be like mini lawyers and judges of Fëanor, which is interesting. Like, I guess it makes sense because the highest authority, they don't have like laws. Like if they had like a law system, that it would make sense that Fëanor would be like judged under that law system. But because it was so peaceful among the elves, they haven't probably had a need for a lot of this kind of stuff. If they're giving away jewels for free all the time, there's no criminal court system here. So the Valar do have to take it upon themselves, and so they do the right thing to do, which is I'm joking by the way, like, so to the person who has isolated themselves from society, isolate them further and tell them that they need to learn their ways. But it's also at this point that the malice of Melkor has been revealed, and people, the Valar finally cotton on that Melkor didn't actually learn his lessons. But yeah, it's just kind of frustrating that they were like, you must isolate yourself further in order to, you know, counsel with thyself, and remember who and what thou art. And after this matter shall be set in peace and held redress, if others will release thee. And so it doesn't seem like the best punishment for Fëanor, but I do agree that he should have, you know, he literally like threatened someone's life, his brother's life. That needs to be punished somehow. But what's bad about this is that Finwë then kind of sided with Fëanor. And initially I thought Finwë was probably siding with Fëanor because, you know, when you have two people and one of them is more likely to bite you if you disagree with them and the other person is likely to just shrug their shoulders, you might disagree with the person who's more likely to lash out, but you want to avoid their wrath, so you side with them, and it kind of makes your life easy. Like in Finwë's mind, you know, if he sides with Fingolfin, that might not be a very peaceful society, but if he sides with Fëanor, at least he can kind of quell Fëanor's secret fire within him, and he will have a little bit more peace for a little bit longer. But I don't think that's actually how Fëanor was. I think he genuinely, and it was stated on the text, that I think he loves Fëanor most of his sons, and he's blinded by that. And I can only imagine how Fingolfin is taking this. Like, can you imagine just being threatened by a brother, like life-threatening, like having your brother hold a sword against your breast, and then for your very own father, who you know loves you and you love him, sides with the person who tried to kill you? Like, that would be whatever is going through Fingolfin's head. Like, that's really hard for him, like really hard. It would be heartbreaking to have your parent choose choose the person who threatened your life over you. Like, it would just be absolutely devastating. And so I have this massive respect for Fingolfin. We don't really find out what happens to Fingolfin after that, other than the fact that he says, I will release my brother straight away. Like, he's forgiven Fëanor immediately. And I think it's because he's so practical. He's like, it's best that I forgive him right now, because isolating him is going to be bad. But no, Fëanor was stubborn and decided to just leave, and he accepted his punishment and took all his sons with him, as well as his father. Because of the love, thither came Finwë the king, because of the love that he bore to Fëanor, and Fingolfin ruled Noldor in Tirion. Okay, so Fingolfin actually took over from Finwë, which is good. Because I just don't think that Finwë at this point is fit to be king if he's made a decision like that. Like, I don't understand why he's king right now. I think long ago, if Finwë was truly smart, he would have given that up already to Fingolfin, although that might have sparked the war a little bit earlier, but anyway. Okay, I just read that now, so I am very happy that Fingolfin is the king. I think that he will make a very good king, I hope. Please don't tell me he dies. Oh, he's gonna die, isn't he? Oh. Really interesting line by Mandos. And kind of just like a kind of dry humour here from Mandos. Thou speakest, this is Mandos talking to Fëanor as he's giving him his sentence of 12 years. Thou speakest of thraldom. If thraldom it be, thou canst not escape it. It's just like, well, if you're all thralls to us, well, you're thralls, so you can't get away. Like, because if you actually are a thrall, you don't really have any power. So Mandos is like, that doesn't actually make sense, because you clearly have free will and are doing what you want. So, like, it's obvious to Mandos that it should be clear to Fëanor that they aren't thralls. So he's just like, look, if you're a thrall, you wouldn't be able to kind of do this. You wouldn't have been able to hold a sword up to your brother's chest. You wouldn't have been able to make the Silmarils. It's just so funny. It's like, either you are a thrall, in which case all of your cries and anger at being a thrall are useless because you're a thrall, or you're not a thrall and all of your cries about being a thrall are useless and stupid because you're not a thrall. It's like, either way, like, I don't know, I just find that irony so funny from Mandos. It's so funny. Melkor makes his last stand, Melkor's last stand, to try to convince Fëanor to go over to Middle-earth. I'm just trying to think why Melkor wants them to go over to Middle-earth. I think why does Melkor really want the elves to leave Aman and go to Middle-earth? I think perhaps because then Melkor could have more control over killing and destroying the elves once they're over there. But like, surely Melkor knows that there's a bunch of elves already over there. Teleri. I know that he isn't really interested in the Teleri, but they're over there. Yeah, he hates the Noldor most, so I guess he wants to focus on getting the Noldor out of the grip of the Valar so that he can then start killing them. Or hurting them. I don't think death of the elves is necessarily what Melkor wants straight up. He wants to actually see them suffer. Melkor tries to convince Fëanor to come over until he eventually... Fëanor is kind of like, it's kind of like a codependent relationship. Like, they both can see how they could use each other for their own ends. But eventually Fëanor is scared because he doesn't want to get anyone else into his circle who could threaten his possession of the Silmarils. So as soon as Melkor mentions the Silmarils, Fëanor's just like, absolutely not, go away. Which is really funny. There's this hilarious line that, and he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. It's just like, he's a comedy writer because that is just so funny. Get thee gone from my gate, thou jail crow of Mandos. It's just like, oh my god, Fëanor. Like, Fëanor is terrible, but like, that was just hilarious, and I'm so glad that he did that. Fëanor is the only one who would be able to do that and kind of like make it funny. Like, I literally wrote here on my copy, I was like, nice, like, good move, Fëanor. It was satisfying to see him do that to Melkor. As ridiculous it was, because I keep thinking, like, Melkor is really not willing to use any of his powers aside from very subtle manipulation, because I assume Melkor is worried about, you know, all of the other Valar coming and locking him up again. So I get that. So Melkor's in this particularly vulnerable position where like one measly little elf can slam the door in his face and piss him off so much that Melkor now is like a thunderstorm roaming around. It's just such a hilarious situation, and I know it's going to change real soon as they go to Middle Earth, but he is like a god trapped in a really awkward position who's getting pushed around by elves, and I can imagine that Melkor is so pissed off about that. Thus Melkor departed from Valinor, and for a while the two trees shone again unshadowed, and the land was filled with light. They did not know what evil might yet come. So yeah, Melkor's presence was dimming the light of the trees, and so when he left, finally, they burned brighter again, which is great. The next chapter is called The Darkening of Valinor, so I'm assuming they are going to, the trees are going to lose their light again, and I imagine this is going to have something to do with Fëanor somehow. Unless Melkor comes back, what else would dim the light of the trees? Just general unrest? Lack of peace? Turning away from Manwë? Or the elves leaving independently? I don't know. We'll see. But I really liked in this chapter the family dynamics of Finwë's kids. I'm interested to see now Fingolfin and Fëanor's, oh, there's so many F names, it's driving me mad, as well as Finarfin's kids. I'm really interested to see them. We haven't really got mention of like any of them except for like their names in a previous chapter. But at this point, if I was an elf, I would want to be a descendant of Fingolfin. So there you have it. That is my chosen elf line. I don't know what yours is. Maybe mine will change later. I will see you for the next chapter.